All right, so in verse 9, John encounters one of the angels that had the 7 bowls of wrath. There is no indication here that this is necessarily the same one as he was talking to earlier, but that's possible. But here again, one of those angels serves as a guide for John, particularly to show John the bride. We've seen this a couple times in Revelation where John is told, I'm going to show you something. And then we have this kind of discursus on something, and then we finally get to the point of seeing it. Well, that's what's happening here, right? He's seen the New Jerusalem, but now the New Jerusalem is the focus. Funny contrast here between this chapter and chapter 17. In chapter 17, one of those angels was going to show him the prostitute and the judgment of the prostitute. But here we see the bride. And so, again, that undercurrent of sexuality serving as a metaphor for relationship with God, a rejection for God, notions of purity and uncleanness, right? The cleanness of the prostitute, the purity of the bride. But this time she is now called the wife of the Lamb, in the sense that what we're seeing now is kind of the full realization. Okay? The engagement has been completed in the marriage, so to speak. And so once again, John is carried spiritually away. Whether that should be understood as a capital S spirit or a lowercase s spirit, John is seeing this as part of his vision. And where he's carried this time is to a great high mountain. Now we might understand this, if you're trying to get a picture of what John is seeing to some extent. The one thing we might say, all right, he's seeing on a mountain and he's looking down and seeing the city. I don't think it's that. I think instead that he's taken to the mountain, and that's where the city is on top of this great high mountain. 2 reasons I say that. 2 biblical passages. Isaiah chapter 2, where it talks about all the nations streaming into the mountain of the Lord's house. All right. Let's actually turn there. Isaiah chapter 2. Beginning in verse 2. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be exalted as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall stream into it. Many peoples will come and say, come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. Right? And so Isaiah 2 talks about the mountains of the Lord's house. Daniel chapter 2. If you think of Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has seen this vision in his dream of this huge statue made up of various metals. And he sees a stone cut out of the mountain without hands, and it comes and crushes the statue. And then that stone becomes a mountain. All right? And so I think, it's not just John having a vantage point of looking down from a mountain, but that this New Jerusalem sits on a mountain. Why call the city, this holy city, Jerusalem?
Because that was the holy city of first-century Christians, and that's what they would understand and associate it with.
Okay. They would associate it with that earthly Jerusalem, the importance of Jerusalem. Right? It was from Jerusalem that the gospel had gone out. And certainly if we went even further back, it's the city of David, it's the hope of nations, right? All sorts of things wrapped up with the concept of Jerusalem, even though the physical Jerusalem had rejected Christ and had frequently turned away from God. There's something important about that idea of Jerusalem. And so this is a new Jerusalem. But once again, we are reminded. This is one of those things where, in case you might forget, you're going to make sure to over-communicate here. It's coming down from God. It's not the physical Jerusalem. It's not something built by human beings. but a city coming down from God. And in this city is the glory of God. Once again, I think that this is just another way of saying God is present there, right? And so the city is full of God's presence. And it makes me think of, the glory of God on Mount Sinai, the glory of God in the temple, the glory of God present in Jesus in the Transfiguration. This kind of the bright, shining, the power, all of those kind of things just radiating out of it. The light of His presence. And the city shines because it is full of this beautiful, brilliant light. It's like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Jasper might not be something that would work so well for us, but maybe if you think of a very clear diamond with the light just kind of shining off of it, reflecting through it. That's kind of what it's meant to see. The shining, brilliant light that comes from not the city, but from God's presence, and it radiates the city. The city has a great high wall with 12 gates. All right, so now John gets into describing the city, the makeup of the city, the characteristics of the city, and it has a high wall. Why did cities have walls? Protection. Right? Why does this city have a wall? From what? I mean, there's nothing to keep out, right? By this point in the story, everything's in the lake of fire that doesn't belong in the city. So why does this city have a wall? A reminder, but I think also if you think about, all right, you're speaking to Christians in a lot of turmoil, and the use of the wall is suggesting that this is going to be a safe place. A secure place. Yes, really in the storyline there's nothing left to get in there, but it's a reminder. Where you're going to go is safe and secure. It's going to be protected. Right? So there's perfect protection, even though, again, it doesn't need really protecting. But the image, right? And so I don't believe heaven's going to necessarily have walls. But the image here that we see is to remind us, it's a place of protection. There's not going to be anything you need to be concerned about. I think the same kind of thing, again, because 12 angels at the gates, the 12 angels kind of seem like they're doing what? They're on watch, they're in guard, right? Again, who are they guarding from? Because everything's been destroyed. But again, it's that emphasizing the safety, the security. Right? They really don't need to guard anything, but protection's going to be there. Because God, you might feel unprotected now. But in the next world, in the new creation, God has it all under control. And so there are 12 gates, 12 angels, and on those gates are the names of the 12 tribes. So again, something symbolic here about the 12. Now here too, it's probably those same 12 from chapter 7. And we talked about how it was kind of an unusual list, with Dan and Ephraim not being included, and Joseph being included, and Levi being included. But I would assume it's the same list. We're meant to be thinking of that. It's unclear here whether each door, each gate has a separate name, or that all 12 names are on all 12 gates. Probably the first thing you think of is, okay, one name on each gate, right? There's the Reuben gate, and the Judah gate, and the Joseph gate. Again, I think this is symbolic. So by saying the names of the 12 tribes are inscribed on the gates, what's symbolized here? What could be symbolized here, given our discussions about what 12 represents?
God's people are going to be there?
That all of God's people are going to be in there, right? The totality of God's people are within the city. On the east, there's 3 gates, north, south, and west. That might just be a way to express it. Maybe it could also mean that there's equal access for everyone to get into the city, right? Nobody, whether you're in the north, south, east, or west, God has provided access, perhaps. But the wall of the city has 12 foundations. What's a foundation for? All right, you put something on. Hold something up, right? This idea of you build on a foundation to have that support, have strength. Do you usually build something with 12 foundations? No. But the idea here, of course, is, first of all, the symbolic nature of the names of the 12 apostles, but also that it's this complete support, complete foundation. This is something that is stable, is not going to be shaken. The names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb are on the foundations here too. Is Peter Jasper and Andrew Sardis, and or is it the 12 names on each of the foundations? Either way, we see passages like Ephesians chapter 2 that talk about the church being built on the apostles and prophets and the foundation. Go ahead, Chance.
I was going to say,
okay.
12, but
that's the other thing, right? Which 12? Right? Because at the beginning of Acts, Matthias takes Judas's place, and then you got Paul, and then sometimes Barnabas is referred to as an apostle. Here too, you're not meant to think about it too much, right? Because the idea of the 12 was used to refer to the apostles, and it's right. But yeah, that is the other thing to think. Wait a second. Plus, was John like, where am I in there? Right? Looking for his name. Number 4. Could I be moved to Onyx? So the foundations, right? Here too, this is another reason why I think the 24 elders represent the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles, because you have them here in the ways and the gates and the foundations of the city. Once again, we see measuring take place, right? So John gets an image of the walls, the foundation, and this angel, one of the 7 angels with the 7 bowls, is going to measure using a rod of gold, which I think is interesting compared to some of the things that are later in this chapter. Just as John was to measure the temple in chapter 11, this angel measures the city. Now think back to chapter 11. What is symbolized by measuring this city?
completion.
All right? Yeah, completion, ownership, right? God, all those within those gates belong to God. The protection, right? God knows His people. And as John's looking at this city and as it's being measured, what's the shape of the city? Not just a square. A square is two-dimensional. This is three-dimensional, so it's a cube. And so the city lies 4 square, but it's a cube. It's not just a two-dimensional structure. It's a three-dimensional structure. And its length is the same as its width, right? So all three dimensions are measured, and we'll see the measurement here same. Many ancients viewed the cube as the perfect shape, and we can kind of understand that. And we should also remember that in the tabernacle, thinking back to earlier, I'll tabernacle with them. The tabernacle, the most holy place, was a cube. And that innermost sanctuary, where the Ark of the Covenant was, symbolic of God's presence, was a cube. And so the city, the New Jerusalem, is a cube. But It's a really big cube because it's 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles, right? Length, width, and height. Now, it's helpful in one sense to put it in miles, because we can kind of understand miles a little bit more, but we lose the symbolic nature. Somebody has an older translation. What's the measurement in verse 16? 12,000 stadia. Right? And so by putting it in miles, we lose the symbolic. Right? It's 12 times 1,000. Now, how big of a city would this be? Well, I tried to figure it out. I Googled a bunch of things, so I'm like, okay, how do I try and put this in something that we can all understand? What I found that I think is pretty reliable is that it would cover most of North America, from Canada to New Mexico. But going up, it would actually bust through the atmosphere because of how high it goes. Which, if it's new heavens and new earth, there may be no need for an atmosphere. But I think it's symbolic here, saying there's room for everybody. In fact, some of the things I saw claimed that 1,500 miles would be like 600,000 stories. So, there's plenty of room for everybody.
Which is why you need 12 foundations.
Which is why you need 12 foundations. Because the wall is 144 cubits thick. Now, why newer translations say 1,500 miles, but go back to the cubits when measuring the wall? I have no idea. But 144, right, 12 times 12, right, so symbolic, but that would make it about 216 feet, which reminds us we're supposed to use human measurement. Right, so any of these measurements, they're coming from human measurement. And so that would be about 216 feet, taking the cubit at around 18 inches. Supposedly, again, this is some things I've read, supposedly, if you had a wall that high, 216 feet would not be thick enough to support it. But again, it's not the point of the actual dimensions, it's the symbolic nature. Right? This is a place of perfect protection, room for everybody, and everybody is a place of great beauty, great presence, great provision. Now, in the next several verses, John notes that the wall's made of jasper, the city is pure gold, clear as glass. And then the foundations were given a bunch of different things, and depending on your translation, you might have some that are the same, some might be a little different. This is one of the problems with translating Revelation, is that there are a lot of words that only appear in Revelation and might only appear one or two times. And so, scholars, translators have to kind of sometimes guess what these refer to. The wall built of jasper, pure gold glass, pure gold clear as glass. Various jewels serving as the foundations. Note, it's not that the foundations have jewels on them. It is an entire foundation made of sapphire, right? For a city, 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles. Furthermore, each of the gates is a giant pearl, right? And so the idea that the pearly gates, streets of gold, and all that comes from this passage in Revelation. So the wall built out of jasper, a pure gold city, jewels serving as foundations, pearly gates, and a street of city that is pure gold, transparent as glass. Now, certainly we could say part of the point here is to emphasize the spirit of the city's beauty. And many ancient streets would not have been paved. And so here's a city with a paved road. And so what's the point of all these jewels? Why go through and list all these jewels? And pearly gates and streets of gold.
Maybe showing the worth of what's to come, maybe in a way that could really help them understand how important it was.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I think it's even maybe more further than what we think of, because do you build streets of gold? Matt does, okay. Most of us don't. So here we have these things that are considered to be very precious metals, and they're used as building materials. Right? And so it's like these are just, it's common stuff. And so not only is it the precious, the beauty is that it's, the things that we consider valuable, they're building streets out of. Right? Because it's so prevalent, any sort of thing meant to suggest here that all the things we value can't even compare to what is to come. We'll go ahead and stop there for today. We'll talk about that last section about there being no temple, there being no sun and moon, and then move into chapter 22, the river, the water of life.